Hi guys, I'm back. Thank you for those of you who've been following along with our read alouds. Today I'm back with Charlotte's Web and I'm going to be reading to you chapter 3 of the story. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. I love this book. I've been really excited to see what you've been posting on Seesaw about the story. And I know that the last time we read together, I had asked you about our story map. Right now, we only have the one event on it, which is that Fern saves Wilbur from what her dad does. When her dad is trying to kill the pig, she actually comes in and saves Wilbur. And I asked you on Seesaw to share what you thought might be the next big event that we might add. And most of you were telling me, and I agree, that the next big thing that happened in chapter 2 was that Wilbur actually got sold to Fern's uncle Homer. So Wilbur gets sold to Uncle Homer. And today when we read, we'll get to hear at the beginning of the chapter a little bit more about where Wilbur lives now and what that barn is like and the place where he lives. And then we're going to get to know Wilbur a little bit better as a character, and we're going to get to see and hear about his first big adventure at his new home. This chapter 3, is called Escape. Okay, it's called Escape. And I want you to be thinking about a couple things as we read. I want you to be thinking about what we can add to what we know about Fern. So think as I'm reading about, what do you hear that you think we're learning about Fern? Are we learning anything new about her that we could add to our little character chart? I want you to be thinking about what this title of this chapter means, Escape. Maybe even right now you're making a prediction in your mind. What does that mean, escape? Who's going to escape? Is Wilbur going to escape? Is he going to escape his new home? Is he going to try to get out and maybe go back and see Fern? So we're going to check in on that prediction as we read today. And then I also want you to just kind of be paying attention so that at the end of the chapter we can kind of retell what happens at the beginning of the chapter, in the middle, and at the end. Okay? And then of course I have some new words that I'm going to be teaching you today as we read. This is kind of a longer one, so be sure to listen closely. Chapter 3, Escape. The barn was very large. It was very old. It smelled of hay and it smelled of manure. There's that word we just learned. It smelled of the perspiration of tired horses and the wonderful sweet breath of patient cows. It often had a sort of peaceful smell, as though nothing bad could ever happen again in the world. It smelled of grain and of harness dressing and of axle grease and of rubber boots and of new rope. So these are all kind of typical things you might find in a barn, right? And whenever the cat was given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell of fish. But mostly it smelled of hay, for there was always hay in the great loft up overhead. And there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and the horses and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in winter when the animals spent most of their time indoors, and it was pleasantly cool in summer when the big doors stood wide open to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups on the main floor for the cows, a sheepfold down below for the sheep, a pig pen down below for Wilbur, and it was full of all sorts of things that you would find in barns. Ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, scythes, lawnmowers, snow shovels, axe handles, milk pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows are actually a type of bird, like to build their nests in. It was the kind of barn that children liked to play in, and the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that a manure pile is a good place to keep a young pig. Pigs need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down there in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came almost every day to visit him. Here's Wilbur. Looks like he's eating from a kind of like his little feeding trough there. She found an old milking stool that had been discarded. Discarded means to get rid of something. And she placed the stool in the sheepfold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. There's a picture of Fern. So she's sitting on that old milking stool, just watching her pig. What does that make you think about her? The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese, who lived happily with the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out, and he did not allow her to go into the pig pen. But he told Fern that she could sit on the stool and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know she was sitting there right outside his pen. But he never had any fun. No walks, no rides, no swims. Kind of different from when he was back at Fern's house, right? One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered out into a small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. There's never anything to do around here, he thought. He walked slowly to his food trough and sniffed it to see if anything had been overlooked at lunch. Overlooked means that somebody didn't notice it. So Wilbur's looking for food that the other animals didn't notice so that he can eat it up. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. And when he tired of this, he walked indoors, climbed to the top of the manure pile, and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired of standing still, tired of lying down. I'm less than 2 months old, and I'm tired of living, he said. He walked out to the yard again. So we can imagine Wilbur's. Have you ever felt like this? You just kind of walk back and forth between rooms trying to find something to do. Oh, maybe I'll have something to eat. Maybe I'll try this. No, that's boring. Wilbur's feeling really bored right now. When I'm out here, he said, there's no place to go but in. When I'm indoors, there's no place to go but out to the yard. That's where you're wrong, my friend, said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence and saw the goose standing there. You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard, said the goose, who talked rather fast. One of the boards is loose. Push on it, push on it, and come on out. What? Said Wilbur. Say it slower. At the risk of repeating myself, said the goose, I suggest you come on out. It's wonderful out here. So if you can picture this part, Wilbur, he spends most of his time in that basement of the barn, but he has a little pen that he can come out outside. But on the other side of that pen is way more room to roam. So the goose is kind of telling him, come on, push through the fence. There's a little loose board in the fence. Come on out, push through and see if you can get into this bigger space. Did you say a board was loose? That I did, said the goose. Wilbur walked up to the fence and saw the goose was right. One board was loose. He put his head down, shut his eyes, and pushed. The board gave way. In a minute, he had squeezed through the fence and was standing in the long grass outside his yard. The goose chuckled. How does it feel to be free? She asked. I like it, said Wilbur. That is, I guess I like it. Actually, Wilbur felt queer to be outside his fence with nothing between him and the big world. Queer means he feels kind of weird about it. This feels kind of strange to him. Where do you think I'd better go? Anywhere you like, said the goose. Go down through the orchard, root up the sod, go down through the garden, dig up the radishes, root up everything, eat grass, look for corn. Look for oats, run all over, skip and dance, jump and prance, go down through the orchard and stroll the woods. The world is a wonderful place when you're young. I can see that, replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, stopped, and looked all around, sniffed the smells of the afternoon, and then set off walking down through the orchard. We know what an orchard is, right? It's like the area on a farm where all the trees are planted, especially fruit trees. So you can imagine rows of trees with grass, right? Pausing in the shade of an apple tree, he put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anybody had noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the men. "Homer!" she cried. "Pigs out! Lurvy, pigs out! Homer, Lurvy, pigs out! He's down there under the apple tree." "Now the trouble starts," thought Wilbur. "Now I'll catch it." The goose heard the racket, and she too started hollering. "Run, run, run, downhill! Make for the woods, the woods!" she shouted to Wilbur. "They'll never, never, never catch you in the woods." The Cocker Spaniel heard the commotion, and he ran out from the barn to join the chase. Remember, a Cocker Spaniel is a type of dog. And commotion, the word commotion here means just a lot of noise and confusion and excitement. So the dog hears it, and he's going out to try and catch Wilbur. They don't want him to run away. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came out of the machine shed where he was there mending a tool. Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everybody walked toward Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off, and anyway, he had never been down there in the woods and wasn't sure that he would like it. "Get around behind him, Lurvy," said Mr. Zuckerman, "and drive him toward the barn, and take it easy, don't rush him. I'll go and get a bucket of slops." The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. There's that word escape, the title of our chapter. So here's where I'm making the connection of why this chapter is called Escape, right? This is all about Wilbur's first time that he kind of ventures out of his little pen and into the bigger world. Escape. The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. So all these animals are hearing, right, that he finally got out. Whenever any creature broke loose on Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest to the other animals. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lambs learned about it from their mothers. The horses in their stalls in the barn pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollering, and soon the horses caught on to what was happening. "Wilbur's out," they said. Every animal stirred and lifted his head and became excited to know that one of his friends had gotten free and was no longer penned up or tied up. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to run. It seemed as though everybody was after him. Ooh, I wonder how Wilbur's feeling right now. He's seeing all these people are talking about him. Remember, he's just a baby. If this is what it's like to be free, he thought, I believe I'd rather be penned up in my own yard. The Cocker Spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other side. Mrs. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he started for the garden, and now Mr. Zuckerman was coming down towards him carrying a pail. So we can think about all these adults kind of zooming in on him. Oh, he must be feeling so nervous. This is really awful, thought Wilbur. Why doesn't Fern come? And he began to cry. Oh, poor Wilbur. The goose took command and began to give orders. Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about, dodge about. He wants him to run around, cried the goose. Skip around, run toward me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out, make for the woods, twist and turn. The Cocker Spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran. Lurvy reached out and grabbed. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Lurvy. Ah! The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's legs. Lurvy missed Wilbur and grabbed the dog instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run downhill, suggested the cows. Run toward me, yelled the gander. Run uphill, cried the sheep. Twist and turn, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Here's a picture. So this is Lurvy. That's the guy the Zuckermans hire to help him on their farm. And there he is on top of the dog. What's Wilbur gonna do? Look out for Lurvy, called the cows. Look out for Zuckerman, cried the gander. Watch out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, screamed the goose. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by all this hullabaloo. He didn't like being the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him, but he couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time, and he couldn't twist and turn when he was jumping and dancing, and he was crying so hard he could barely see anything that was happening. Oh, poor Wilbur. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him in her arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's cornflakes, and a popover left from the Zuckerman's breakfast. Come, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. Come, pig. Wilbur took a step toward the pail. No, said the goose. It's the old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity. He's appealing to your stomach. Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step toward the pail. Pig, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began walking slowly toward the barnyard, looking all about him innocently, as if he didn't know that a little white pig was following along behind him. So Mr. Zuckerman's using this bucket of food right to get Wilbur back into the barn. You'll be sorry, called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking toward the pail of slops. You'll miss your freedom, honked the goose. An hour of freedom is worth a barrel full of slops. Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slops into the trough. Then he pulled the loose board away from the fence so there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider! Reconsider! Cried the goose. That means think about it again. Don't just go back to the barn. Remember how boring that was? Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence into his yard. He walked to the trough and took a long drink of slops, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the popover. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8-penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. He's quite a pig, said Lurvy. Yes, he'll make a good pig, said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt the warm milk in his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. I'm really too young to go out into the world alone, he thought as he lay down. So that was Wilbur's first adventure, his escape from his little pen. Makes me think a lot about Wilbur and what kind of a pig he is. And we met some new characters too, right? We met the goose who kept repeating his words and talking really fast. Wilbur was quite different from the goose, wasn't he? I wonder if you might think about some ways that Wilbur and the goose are very different and maybe why they feel so differently. We also met Mr. Zuckerman, Mrs. Zuckerman, and Lurvy, the guy who helps out on their farm. The next chapter, chapter 4, is called Loneliness. Poor Wilbur. I wonder if he's going to be feeling lonely in the next chapter, missing Fern again. Interesting. Well, I'll have some questions for you up on Seesaw. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back soon with chapter 4.